The time is just gone 7 minutes past 8, and we kick off this morning taking a look at the National Dialogue on Coalition Governments, which starts off today and tomorrow. And we have learned that the Deputy President Paul Mashatile will be hosting the 2 day National Dialogue on Coalition Governments with an aim to come up with a national framework to guide the management of coalition governments. And we're going across now to be joined by Director at Rivonia Circle, Tessa. Tessa, good morning to you and welcome. We do appreciate your time with us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this discussion, how critical is it? And it is much needed considering where we are at this point in time politically. And I'm sure with what has been playing out at local government level, there has been a lot of talk, there has been a lot of concerns with regard to coalition governments and coalition politics in general in this country, Tessa.
Yeah, it's a much overdue conversation that we've needed to have as a country for I would say for years now. Besides the 2016 point where it became clear that coalitions were becoming normative, particularly at the level of metros. Our constitution and our electoral system has always lent itself to coalitions. It's actually quite an anomaly to have one party dominance with the kind of electoral system that we have, a multi party system. And so we should have been prepared for this a long time ago. And so finding that there are lacunas both in the law and in the political culture that doesn't allow for us to have robust and productive coalitions means that it was definitely time for us to have a set of frameworks that can guide not only the political culture in the short run, but hopefully in the future as well, legislation on this issue.
Yes, and obviously we've learned some very hard lessons. We've learned some very bitter lessons from what we've seen playing out at the local government level with regard to coalition politics. And we know political parties, their ideologies obviously differ, but we've seen party politics playing a dominant role within these coalition governments. And as a result, we've seen what has been playing out in the city of Johannesburg, for instance, mayor after mayor. And at the end of the day, it is you and I, the ratepayer or the taxpayer, that is on the receiving end in the most negative sense of the word.
Sure. And our instinct would be to blame coalitions and say coalitions are a bad thing. But coalitions are not intrinsically a bad thing. They are an outcome of an election. So I've heard many people want to debate whether we are ready for coalitions or whether coalitions are good or bad. That's neither here nor there. Coalitions are outcome of elections, and you need to learn how to manage them. And I think we haven't done that work. But as you rightfully say, if we don't figure out how to do coalitions better, we are going to find ourselves in states of instability, and not that we've had glowing reviews from one party dominance either. One party dominance hasn't necessarily resulted in service delivery, but certainly we want more stable governance so that we can ask for service delivery on a more continuous basis. I think what for me has been the most concerning thing about the way that we've dealt with coalitions is that at the very local level, so if you look at small municipalities, most coalitions there actually are functional. I mean, we have over 66 local municipalities that are under coalition. It is actually when you get to the level of the metros and the cities where you start seeing the consistent instability. And that's because the budgets get bigger, so the stakes are higher. And people are playing positional politics there without a lot of accountability from the community. So, I mean, if you think about the city of Johannesburg as a community, it is very difficult for us as a community in Johannesburg to come together and hold political parties to account. Whereas at smaller municipality levels, the ability to rally society for accountability is higher. And so where the stakes are higher, we need more checks and balances in place that help with accountability.
And in a minute, we will touch on what some of those checks and balances should be, and what this national dialogue should be focusing on in terms of checks and balances. But the fact of the matter is, now that this dialogue is taking place, it is being hosted at the highest level. The deputy president is going to be there, Paul Mashatile, which tells us one thing, that the dominant party, the ANC government, has recognized the fact that going into the future, we are going to go into coalitions. And they've also resigned to the fact that they are not going to get that outright majority.
No, absolutely. It is certainly a recognition on the ANC's part that they cannot ignore coalitions as a part of our politics anymore. I think they desperately had hoped that they'd be able to reverse it, but we've seen from the time of the 2004 elections, where the DA went into a coalition in the city of Cape Town, and then subsequently the Western Cape, that it's very hard to turn back the clock once coalitions have set in, and for the ANC particularly to turn back the clock once they've lost their dominance. And so this is definitely a recognition on their part. And I'm glad that it's being taken up by the state, because this could have been hosted by the ANC as a party. But I'm glad that they've taken the approach that this should be led through the state, just so that the processes that come out of it can have direct bearing on policy and legislation.
Yes. Now, the key issue here is, and I've seen one of the comments come through from one of the political parties talking about separation of politics from administration. And this is absolutely important. This is key. And you speak about the larger metros, the bigger cities, and this is where we haven't seen that separation between administration and politics. And politics has somehow dominated the governance of the metro or the city. And I'm sure that this is going to be absolutely critical. But also at the same time, the second issue is ideologies. The difference in ideologies, for instance, you're talking of the left, you're talking of the right, all of that at the end of the day is going to play out. And the key issue is, how is this dialogue going to negotiate or navigate around some of these critical issues that we know have been playing out for a long time, Tessa?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the ideology question, because I wish we were at the point where ideology was actually the big contesting point. We've actually found ourselves where parties are not even negotiating coalitions on the basis of ideas. They're doing it very crudely on the basis of office holding and positionality. And that's been one of the weaknesses of our coalitions. If you look at coalitions across the world, and particularly countries like Germany and Sweden and all of that, they have coalitions across ideological frameworks, because what they're focusing on is what they need to deliver, a contract of delivery. And I think in our case, it should be even easier that if we were going to be talking about ideology, all of our ideologies must come down to one thing. Are we going to deliver particularly basic services and the basic human rights that people require in this country to the citizenry? And if it is on the basis of ideology, probably the economy would be the greatest sticking point. But then we can get into real debate about what kind of economy we need. Right now, we have politicians that are stuck on who's going to get what position so that they can get access to a particular financial line item within the budget. And I think the outcome that we should look for in the next 2 days is not only moving towards those more substantive conversations, but also asking what kind of mechanisms can we put in place to ensure that coalitions are more stable and more functional. One big one is the time frame right now within our constitution and within our laws around how many days it takes for a government to form. Right now, it's 2 weeks. Parties have 2 weeks to negotiate coalitions. In other countries, you have up to 6 months, even up to a year, to negotiate those coalitions. But here we only have 2 weeks. And part of that is because of what you've raised about the ways in which the administration has been politicized. One of the untold stories of the city of Johannesburg is how when parties come into power there, they find that deep into the administration, bureaucrats are there in their party with their party caps on, trying to block things that new administrations are trying to do because the bureaucrats are there on party agendas. The only way you get it to work that a coalition can take time to form is if the government isn't dependent on the politicians in order to function. And so we must depoliticize the state. We must make sure that state functionaries are not just there doing party political work, so that we have time for those administrations to do the kind of negotiations necessary.
Tessa, I need to take a quick ad break. I'm going to put you on hold. We'll be back in a minute or two.
Located along the banks of the Crocodile River bordering the Kruger National Park. As a guest at Buckler's Africa Lodge, one can enjoy an amazing sunrise or sunset on our spacious deck area while you catch a glimpse of some wildlife sightings along the Crocodile River. The sounds of the African savanna will greet you whilst you enjoy your morning coffee. Buckler's Africa Lodge by Tingana Collection. Buckler's Africa Lodge is ideally situated only 6 kilometers from the Crocodile Bridge Gate in the Kruger National Park. Catering for all travelers with variety, we have 4 types of the finest rooms: superior rooms, deluxe suites, and 2-bedroomed family units. Each room is equipped with the finest amenities to make your stay unforgettable. Guests can choose between the self-catering option or book their accommodation with breakfast and dinner included. Buckler's Africa Lodge is your ideal location for the ultimate Kruger getaway experience. We specialize in exhilarating and educational game drives in Kruger, tailor-made to suit your family. Inquire about our various accommodation offerings and other activities. Visit www.tingana.co.za for more information. Buckler's Africa Lodge by Tingana Collection. Experience the pulse of Africa with us.
Sponsor an orphan, and you'll help support a vulnerable child to have the education they've always dreamed of, so they can build a brighter future. You'll be feeding a hungry stomach and a hungry mind with knowledge that will last them a lifetime. That's the power of an education. Sponsor an orphan now with Islamic Relief.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using Tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like Tib black seed. You can find Tib black seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Time is just gone 21 minutes past 8 as we continue with our discussion this morning with the director at Rivonia Circle, Tessa Dooms. We are talking about the National Dialogue on Coalition Governments, which kicks off today in Cape Town and will last until tomorrow. Tessa, just to continue now, one of the key outcomes and objectives of this National Dialogue is to obviously to develop some sort of a framework and also a foundation for crafting legislation at some point in time. Because what we've seen until now with coalition government politics is, there have been a lot of loose arrangements. There have been a lot of agreements that have been made. These agreements have been reneged upon, and as a result, we see the type of instability as, and I'm just using Johannesburg City once again as an example. But the key issue here is this framework, this foundation. What should that actually ideally constitute of, and so that at some point in time we can actually look at some sort of legislation that will be adopted and crafted at some point in time.
Yeah, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a legislative process before 2024. So, what they have to agree on most urgently are things that can change in terms of the political culture and almost informal agreements on the way that we're going to do things that are public, so that the public can hold parties accountable to that going into the 2024 election. I think the first thing is an agreement on putting forward to the electorate before the election what the principles are around which parties are going to coalesce. And I think a second one is also consulting the public on coalitions and coalition agreements. The third one is holding those coalition agreements to legally binding standards, seeing them as legally binding agreements that could actually be taken up legally if reneged upon. The fourth would be to give longer grace periods in terms of the negotiation period. So right now, because as I said, the law requires 14 days, there needs to be some wiggle room beyond that 14 days for a final establishment of a final agreement. I think that would help just, with giving a bit more space. I think what we saw in the city of Johannesburg, particularly in 2021, was because there was such a short period of time, people signed things that they clearly didn't believe in. And so they then reneged on them. So I think more grace periods around that. The next one is, who holds accountable? And I think the public need to have some role in holding coalition partners accountable. Their political principles, of course, would have to have a role in holding them accountable. But in countries like Sweden, for example, it is actually the speaker in parliament that holds political parties publicly accountable for their agreement. So the speaker holds those agreements, and the speaker can actually say, this is what the agreement is, this is what the agreement is based on, and this is how it should go. I think the final one is what it means to constitute a coalition and who can participate. And this is where the ANC has most strongly pronounced itself on, where it's saying that there should be a minimum threshold that a party gets in order for it to be part of a coalition. What this could look like is either that the party with the highest seats and those that meet a threshold below it come to whatever arrangement that they would like to come to. Or it could mean that the party with the highest seats decides who gets invited to the coalition party or the coalition agreement, or more structured, that you actually say per seats that you get in parliament, you will then get access to even a cabinet post. So you could say if a party gets 10%, they get 3 cabinet posts. And that's actually an arrangement that already exists in the city of eThekwini, for example. The eThekwini Mayoral Council gets made up based on the number of seats that a party gets in council. So there are a number of arrangements that could become to that don't require legislative change right now.
Yes, and obviously, for yourself and myself as a vote, we somewhat in a dilemma because you vote for a party of choice, and you don't know who your party is going to get into bed with in terms of a coalition government in the build-up to the elections. And as you mentioned, we will not see legislation by the time that 2024 election has happened. But should political parties be clear as far as their policies go with regard to coalition governments? Should they make it very, very clear to the voters in advance, in their manifestos, for example, in as they campaign for their party and they campaign towards the elections?
Certainly, and I think that as the electorate, we must demand that, and not only on this issue. I think I keep saying to people, 2023 is a more important year for the voter than 2024, because in 2023 we get to set the priorities for what should be in those manifestos and what kind of standard of leadership we expect from those who want our votes. We must be more proactive as the voter, and the issue of electoral reform and having a different way to elect so that we're not held ransom by political parties should be an electoral issue. We must ask parties, where do you stand on the issue of constituencies? Where do you stand on the issue of independent candidates? Where do you stand? And make that an electoral bargaining chip. Similarly with coalitions, what are the principles that you're going into a coalition with? How do we know that we can keep you accountable for the coalition decisions that you make? I personally am not interested in parties pronouncing on who they will go into coalition with or who they won't in terms of who the party is. I'm more interested in the principle, because we can't say who the parties are going to be that are going to be the main players before the election actually takes place. That would be disingenuous. But we can say what principles would be followed and what principles we want them to follow as the electorate so that they can get our vote.
Yes, Tessa, and just looking at the national dialogue that is taking place today, we know political parties obviously have got a huge interest, but also civil society in general has got a huge interest because, I'm sure even people like yourself at the Rivonia Circle will be watching with interest, possibly even participating in this coalition because input from civil society is extremely important and critical at a forum like this.
Yes, so we as Rivonia Circle will be participating through our executive director, Lukona Mguni. And there are a number of other civil society organizations that will be around the table. Again, this must be a whole society approach. For too long, we've left politics to politicians, and that cannot be the case anymore. As society, as communities, we must get involved in political decision making, and it doesn't only mean at the polls on the day of voting. Democracy isn't for the citizen just 5 minutes at the voting booth every 5 years. It is a 365 day a year exercise, and we must get more involved. And so I'm very glad that as civil society organizations, as voters, we're taking as much interest in this as we are.
Well, Tessa, we ourselves are watching the space with interest, and let's see what develops over the next 2 days. But for now, we thank you. We appreciate your time with us right here on Salam Media this morning. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Tessa Durham's director at Rivonia Circle with us this morning on Salam Media expectations for the national dialogue on coalition governments, and that is taking place from today right until tomorrow. And in fact, this is going to be quite interesting because when one looks at councils, when one looks at just generally what is playing out, and as Tessa mentioned, there's over 60 municipalities, small municipalities, that are functioning quite effectively with regards to coalition governments. Why is it the case in the bigger metros? And this is where we're looking at positioning, we're looking at party political agendas, all these things playing out, and this is the reason why we see this instability. And the key issue here is separating governance, separating administration from politics. And this is where we need to be politically mature as political parties when we go into these coalition governments. The time is just headed for 8:30 a.m. We come back, we'll be joined by Sheikh Riyad Fattar out of Cape Town.